The award felt heavier than I expected. Cold, solid, a beautifully sculpted piece of metal that represented 1,000,000 sleepless nights, 1,000 rejections, and one spectacular, all-consuming act of revenge. From the stage of the Apex Innovators Gala, the entire world looked like a sea of glittering, upturned faces. But I only saw one. My sister, Serafina. She was sitting in the front row, of course. CEO of Vance Heritage, right where she'd always wanted to be. Her smile was a masterpiece of social engineering, a perfect, dazzling lie stretched taut over a face pale with fury. She was trying to project pride, or at least familial support. She was failing, spectacularly. I leaned into the microphone, the warmth of the spotlight a familiar embrace. "Thank you," I said, my voice smooth and steady, a carefully curated sound of gracious humility. "To the Apex Committee, to my incredible team at Elysian who took a crazy idea and built an empire from it. Thank you." A polite, respectable round of applause. I let it wash over me, a pleasant but meaningless noise. My gaze drifted back to Serafina. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the armrests of her chair. Oh, this was just too good. "But my greatest debt of gratitude," I continued, letting my voice drop just enough to make people lean in, "is to my dear sister, Serafina." A ripple of confusion went through the auditorium. A camera panned to her, and for a split second, her mask slipped. I saw the flash of pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes before it was buried again under a veneer of confused poise. "She taught me a valuable lesson," I said, locking eyes with her across the gilded room. "A silent declaration of war. That a throne given is merely a gilded cage. A throne taken, however, is true power." You could have heard a pin drop. The air crackled with stunned silence. I raised the award, the heavy, beautiful symbol of my victory. "And as for the family business she was so desperate to have?" I let the question hang in the air, a drop of poison in a glass of champagne. "Consider this my official notice of a hostile takeover. The auction for Vance Heritage's assets begins tomorrow." A collective gasp. I saw a few jaws literally drop. Serafina looked like she'd been struck by lightning, all the air sucked from her lungs, her perfect smile collapsing into a ghastly O of shock. I finished with a smile of my own, one that was all teeth. "I told you I'd be back for what's mine." I whispered into the mic, a promise delivered. "This is just the beginning of my rebirth." 5 years earlier, my idea of rebirth was a lot less, hostile. It was called Vance 2.0. The Vance Heritage Boardroom was my father's temple. All dark mahogany, the scent of old leather, and portraits of stern-looking ancestors staring down at you, silently judging your stock portfolio. I stood at the head of the massive table, buzzing with an energy that felt like lightning in my veins. I was 25 and believed I could change the world, or at least our corner of the luxury goods market. "It's not about abandoning tradition," I explained, clicking to a slide showing a sleek, minimalist timepiece with a customizable digital face, rendered to look like our classic celestial chronograph. "It's about making tradition desirable again. It's about heritage that connects, that evolves. We call it Vance 2.0. My father, Richard Vance, leaned forward, his eyes, our eyes, lit with genuine excitement. He was a titan, a man whose approval I'd chased my entire life. And in that moment, I had it. "Ilara, this is brilliant." Across the table, Serafina gave me a small, encouraging nod. My older sister, my confidant, my biggest supporter, or so I thought. "Thank you, Father," I beamed. "The projections show we could capture a whole new demographic, increase market share by 30% in 3 years. Or," a smooth voice cut in, "it could bankrupt us in two." Serafina stood up. She wasn't dramatic. She was never dramatic. That was my role, the creative, the dreamer. She was the responsible one. She moved with a quiet, deadly grace, placing a thick, bound document in front of every board member. It was titled, "Risk Analysis and Legacy Preservation, a Conservative Path Forward." "I love Alara's passion," she began, her tone laced with what sounded like regretful affection. "It was a brilliant performance. But passion doesn't pay the bills. I've taken the liberty of commissioning an independent financial analysis of the Vance 2.0 proposal. My stomach went cold. Independent? From who? A top firm, she said evasively, already directing her attention to our father. And unfortunately, the numbers are sobering. The initial investment is massive, the market is untested, and the risk of brand dilution is catastrophic. They project a 90% chance of failure. 90%? That's insane, I sputtered, looking at the board members, whose faces had turned from intrigued to alarmed. My projections. Your projections were based on hope, Ilara, Serafina said softly, placing a hand on my arm. It felt like a brand. Mine are based on data, on protecting what grandfather built, what father has sustained. She then laid out her own vision. It wasn't a vision, it was a death sentence. Maintain current production, minor cost cutting, a 5% increase in marketing spend on our existing, aging clientele. It was safe. It was boring. It was a slow, elegant decline into irrelevance. My father looked torn. He glanced from me, his face alight with the future I'd shown him, to Serafina, her expression a perfect mask of solemn duty. He was getting older, more cautious. For years, Serafina had been whispering in his ear, a constant, gentle stream of poison, framing my ambition as recklessness, my creativity as a flight of fancy. I just hadn't realized it until now. Dad, please, I begged, my voice cracking. Don't let her do this. This is fear, not strategy. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the man who had taught me to sketch, who had praised my first clumsy designs. Then he looked at Serafina, the daughter who never gave him a moment's worry, who always colored inside the lines. He sighed, a sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the room and my life with it. The board and we have to prioritize the company's stability. Serafina's path is the safer one. He wouldn't meet my eyes. She will be my successor as CEO. The world tilted. The portraits on the wall seemed to sneer. I felt the gazes of the board members slide off me, dismissing me. In a single, calculated move, my sister had not just stolen my idea, she had stolen my future. And what about me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Serafina has suggested you stay on as a creative consultant, my father said, as if this were a generous concession. A title with no power, a gilded cage. I looked at my sister, who was trying to look sympathetic. All I saw was the glint of victory in her eyes. No, I said, my voice suddenly clear and hard. No, thank you. Later that day, in the sterile quiet of an HR office, Serafina slid a check across the table. My severance. It was a pitiful amount, just enough to keep me from starving, but certainly not enough to start a war, a calculated insult. I'm sorry it had to be this way, Ilara, she said, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. I didn't even look at the check. I looked at her. No, you're not, I said, standing up. But you will be. I walked out of Vance Heritage that day without looking back, leaving my home, my legacy, and my family behind. The only things I took with me were a check I didn't want, a fire in my belly, and a promise. The first 6 months were a blur of cheap coffee, cheaper apartments, and the kind of soul-crushing despair that makes getting out of bed a Herculean task. I was a ghost. I watched from the digital sidelines as Serafina gave interviews about honoring tradition and steady leadership. Every platitude was a knife twisting in my gut. Vance Heritage, my birthright, was stagnating, and the world was celebrating my sister for it. My rebirth didn't start with a phoenix rising from the ashes. It started in a grimy 24-hour diner, sketching on a napkin because my laptop had died and my phone was at 3%. I was watching people. The young professionals, the digital nomads, the creative class. They carried beautiful, expensive leather bags from brands like Vance, but they also carried a tangled mess of chargers, power banks, and adapters. Their lives were a seamless blend of analog and digital, but their accessories hadn't caught up. The gap in the market wasn't a gap, it was a canyon, and Vance Heritage was standing on the wrong side of it. The napkin sketch became a 3D model. The model became a prototype I built on my rickety kitchen table, soldering wires until my fingers were raw. I called it Elysian. Not just a company, a rebellion. The severance check, Every last penny of it went into renting a small workshop in the city's most undesirable industrial park. The kind of place where the rent is cheap and you don't ask questions about what the neighbors are doing. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something other than rage. It felt like purpose. But purpose doesn't get you funding. I pitched Elysian to 24 venture capitalists. They all said the same thing, in different, condescending ways. Luxury tech, the margins are too thin. You want to compete with Vance, with that family? You're insane. Honey, it's a cute idea, but you're a no-name. Rejection became my new normal, until I walked into the wrong coffee shop on the right day and nearly spilled a latte on Ben Carter. Ben was a legend in the tech world, a brilliant hardware engineer who'd been unceremoniously fired from a top firm for being, in his words, too awesome for their tiny beige minds. He was trying to get the Wi-Fi to work, swearing at his laptop. The router's throttling bandwidth to prioritize commercial tenants, I said, pointing to a blinking light on the device tucked behind the counter. You'll never get a stable connection here. He looked up, surprised. How'd you know that? I know hardware. I gestured to the schematics on his screen. Working on a new cooling system? An hour later, I had told him everything. The betrayal, Vance 2.0, my struggle with Elysian. He listened, his initial skepticism melting into intrigue. When I showed him the prototype of my smart briefcase, he picked it up, his fingers tracing the seams, his eyes scanning the discreetly integrated charging port. You built this? Yourself? He asked, a note of awe in his voice. In my garage/dungeon, yes. He looked from the briefcase to me. Those VCs are idiots. Your sister is an even bigger idiot. This isn't just a product, it's the future. He grinned, a wide conspiratorial grin. So, when do we start? We were a two-person army against the world. Ben refined my clumsy wiring into elegant, patented circuitry. I obsessed over materials, discovering a recycled composite that could be treated to look and feel more luxurious than Italian leather. We worked 18-hour days, fueled by cheap pizza and a shared, burning desire to prove everyone wrong. We didn't have the money for a traditional launch, so we turned to the people. We put the Elysian briefcase, which we named the Pioneer, on Kickstarter. We made a raw, honest video telling our story. The story of two outsiders trying to build something new. We didn't mention Vance Heritage by name. We didn't have to. The narrative of old versus new, of tradition versus innovation was potent. Our funding goal was $50,000. We hit it in 90 minutes. By the end of the first day, we'd crossed $500,000. By the end of the 48-hour launch window, we'd raised over $2 million from thousands of backers around the globe. I was sitting on the floor of our dusty workshop watching the numbers climb when Ben handed me a bottle of champagne. Not the fancy stuff my father drank, but a cheap bottle from the corner store. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. We weren't a pet project anymore. We were a phenomenon. Elysian was born. And back in the hallowed halls of Vance Heritage, I could only imagine the dawning horror on my sister's face. The war had begun. For a while, the official position from Vance Heritage was one of amused condescension. I'd read quotes from Serafina in business journals. "Oh, we think it's wonderful when young people have hobbies," she'd say, the subtext thick enough to choke on. Heritage and quality are timeless. Fads, by their nature, fade. Fads. We were selling out every production run of the Pioneer within hours. We'd followed it up with a line of smart wallets and a weekender bag with a built-in GPS locator. Elysian wasn't a fad, it was a firestorm, and my sister was still trying to pretend she couldn't feel the heat. The laughter stopped when Vogue called Elysian the essential brand for the modern sophisticate and ran a 2-page spread. The same month, Vance Heritage's quarterly report showed a 7% dip in sales, the first dip in 20 years, and that's when the attack started. It began subtly, anonymous posts on niche fashion blogs. A comment here, a forum thread there. Heard Elysian uses cheap plastic, not the composite they claim. A friend of mine said her Pioneer's battery overheated. It's a fire hazard. Lies, all of them, but mud sticks. This has Serafina's fingerprints all over it, Ben said, pacing our now crowded office, a sleek, open-plan space in a trendy downtown loft. It's her style, no direct confrontation, just 1,000 little cuts from the shadows. She's panicking, I said, a cold fury settling in my chest. Good. My counter-move was radical transparency. I filmed a tour of our entire facility. I showed the recycled materials being pressed and formed. I did a live stream teardown of the Pioneer, showing Ben's elegant, cool-running circuitry. I invited top tech reviewers to come and see for themselves. Our sales spiked by another 15%. Checkmate. So Serafina escalated. I got the call on a Tuesday morning from my primary supplier, a man named Marco, whose family had been providing Vance Heritage with specialty hardware for 3 generations. He was also providing us with our unique clasps. Alara, I am so sorry, he stammered, his voice strained. They're calling in the old family contracts. Exclusivity. If I keep selling to you, they'll cut me off completely. I'll be ruined. Serafina was leveraging a century of my family's influence to strangle my company in its crib. It was a low blow. It was also a declaration that the Cold War was over. I understand, Marco, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You do what you have to do. I hung up and turned to Ben. She's cut off our clasps. Ben swore, running a hand through his already messy hair. We have 5,000 units that need to be assembled for the holiday rush. We can't tool a new design in time. We're screwed. No, we're not, I said. The fire in my belly was back, burning hotter than ever. She thinks she's cut off our supply chain. What she's really done is given us a great marketing opportunity. 2 weeks later, we unveiled the Pioneer 2.0. It featured a brand new clasp, a magnetic keyless locking mechanism that we'd designed and 3D printed in-house. It was sleeker, more secure, and entirely proprietary. Our marketing tagline was simple. They tried to copy us, then they tried to stop us. So we reinvented everything, again. The public ate it up. We were David, and Vance Heritage was the clumsy, bullying Goliath. Serafina's sabotage had backfired so spectacularly it was almost poetic. The inevitable face-to-face came in Milan at the world's most prestigious luxury goods trade fair. By some cruel twist of fate, or a deliberate act of malice by the organizers on Serafina's payroll, our booths were directly opposite each other. The Elysian booth was minimalist, white and brushed steel, with our products displayed like museum pieces under focused spotlights. It was packed. The Vance Heritage booth was a monstrosity of dark wood and velvet ropes, a dusty relic from another era. It was not packed. Serafina stood amidst her dated handbags and watches, her face a thundercloud. We were both invited to speak on a panel called Legacy and Innovation, the Future of Luxury. Of course we were. The organizers could smell blood in the water. We sat side by side on the stage. She was wearing a stuffy, high-collared dress from a legacy designer. I was in a sharp, black, Elysian-designed pantsuit. The moderator, a smarmy journalist named Jean-Pierre, went straight for the jugular. Mademoiselle Vance, he said to Serafina, Vance Heritage has been the standard for a century. What do you make of these new companies, these tech-focused upstarts who claim to be a luxury? Heritage cannot be manufactured overnight, Serafina said, her voice smooth as silk. It requires patience, history, a commitment to timeless quality. One must be wary of fleeting trends and flashy gimmicks that lack substance. She didn't look at me, but everyone knew who she was talking about. The moderator turned to me. Mademoiselle Vance, the other Mademoiselle Vance, he said with a chuckle. Your response? I leaned into my microphone. I agree, I said, and I saw a flicker of surprise on Serafina's face. Heritage is vital. That's why at Elysian, we honor the most important heritage of all, the spirit of innovation. The original Vances weren't afraid of the future. They embraced new techniques, new materials. They were disruptors. True legacy isn't about worshiping the ashes of the past. It's about keeping the fire burning. I paused, then looked directly at Serafina, a benign smile on my face. Some companies are museums. We're building the future. I'll let the customer decide which they'd rather own a piece of. A wave of applause, sharp and immediate, erupted from the audience. Serafina's face was stone. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't insulted her. I had simply used her own logic to dismantle her entire brand identity in 3 sentences. She knew it. The audience knew it. And as I sat back, I knew this rivalry was about to enter a much darker, more dangerous phase. I had publicly humiliated her, and she was not the type to forgive or forget. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was old, raspy, and familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. Is this Alara Vance? It is. Who's this? My name is Arthur Hemlock. I was your father's best friend for 40 years. I served on the Vance board until your sister encouraged my retirement. I sat up straighter. I remembered Arthur, a kind man with sharp eyes who always brought me licorice when he visited. He was the one board member who'd looked genuinely distraught the day I was exiled. Arthur, it's been a long time. Too long, Alara. I'm calling because I can't stand by and watch what that girl is doing to your father's legacy. To your legacy. He sounded tired, but there was an undercurrent of steel in his voice. Vance Heritage is bleeding out. The stock is in a nosedive. Serafina is running it into the ground, and she's obsessed with only one thing: destroying you. Tell me something I don't know, Arthur. My tone was sharper than I intended. I can, he said quietly. I think you need to understand why your father really chose her over you. It wasn't just about a conservative business plan. There was a pause. I have something for you. Something your father kept in his old office safe. Serafina never knew it existed. Can you meet me? We met in a quiet corner of the city library, a place of hushed tones and dusty secrets. Arthur looked older, frail, but his eyes were as sharp as I remembered. He slid a thick manila envelope across the table. It had my father's seal on it. Your father was conflicted, Alara, deeply. But he was also being manipulated in ways you can't imagine, Arthur said. Look in there. Then you'll understand the truth. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it back in the privacy of my office. Ben was out for the day, and the silence of the large space felt heavy, expectant. The first set of documents was what I expected. The original undoctored financial projections for Vance 2.0, commissioned by my father before my pitch. They showed my plan as a blockbuster, a game changer, with even higher potential than I had predicted. The risk analysis was minimal. Serafina's report had been a complete fabrication. That was infuriating, but not surprising. But it was the second set of documents that shattered me. It was a folder of printed emails. A correspondence between Serafina and my father, spanning 2 years leading up to my ousting. Father, I'm worried about Alara. She seems so manic lately. This 2.0 idea has become a dangerous obsession. She was always the dreamer, but this is different. She's not sleeping. She's alienating the design team with her demands. They're afraid of her temper. A lie. I had never been closer to my team. She talks about legacy, but I fear her reckless ambition will tarnish the family name forever. We have to protect the company. We have to protect her from herself. It was a systematic, calculated campaign of psychological warfare. Page after page of carefully crafted lies, painting me as unstable, erratic, and a danger to the company. My sister had been playing a long, dark game, poisoning the well, turning my greatest strength, my passion, into a weapon against me. Then I saw the last document, and the air left my lungs. It was a scanned letter on the letterhead of a prominent psychiatrist. It was a professional opinion, full of clinical terms, diagnosing me with a mild form of bipolar disorder and warning that my grandiose thinking could lead to catastrophic financial decisions. It recommended that I be removed from any position of significant corporate responsibility until I underwent treatment. I had never met this doctor. I had never been to a psychiatrist in my life. It was a forgery, a brilliant, cruel, and utterly devastating forgery, and this was the final piece, the ghost in the machine. The secret little knife she had slid between my father's ribs to make him finally, fatally turn on me. It wasn't business. It had never been just business. This was a character assassination. She hadn't just stolen my company. She had stolen my father's faith in me. She had tried to steal my very identity. I sat there for a long time, the papers spread out on my desk. The snarky, battle-hardened CEO of Elysian dissolved, and for a moment, I was just that 25-year-old girl again, heartbroken in that boardroom. The rage I felt before was a flickering candle, compared to the inferno that now consumed me. The hurt was a bottomless ocean. My phone buzzed, a calendar alert, Apex Innovators Gala, 7 p.m. My objective had been to win, to build a bigger, better company and leave Vance Heritage in the dust. But as I looked at that forged letter, a new plan began to form in my mind. Cold, precise, and absolute. It was no longer enough to win. I was going to burn her entire world to the ground. The Apex Gala was no longer a celebration. It was an execution. My speech, every word of it, was the loading of the gun. The declaration of the hostile takeover was the shot fired in public, designed to cause maximum chaos and panic Serafina's investors. The bluff about auctioning off the assets was the twist of the knife, forcing her hand. It worked even better than I'd planned. The morning after the gala, my phone was a symphony of destruction. News alerts, panicked texts from industry contacts, 3 missed calls from my father. Serafina had done exactly what a cornered, unimaginative animal would do. She'd called an emergency board meeting at Vance Heritage to try and spin the narrative, to reassure everyone that she had it all under control. I walked into the Vance Heritage boardroom at 10 a.m. sharp, the same room where my life had been dismantled 5 years ago. This time, I wasn't there to ask for permission. Serafina was already at the head of the table, her face pale but her expression defiant. The board members looked grim, terrified. They all turned as one when I entered, my heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. "What are you doing here?" Serafina snapped, her voice shrill. This is a closed meeting." "Not anymore," I said, placing my briefcase on the table. I gave a polite nod to the assembled faces. "Gentlemen, I believe you'll find I now own a 15% stake in this company, purchased this morning through a third party. That makes me the second largest shareholder. So please, find me a seat." The corporate lawyer's jaw dropped. Serafina looked like she was going to be physically ill. One of the older board members, a man named Sterling, gestured to an empty chair. I sat down, a picture of calm. "My speech last night was theatrical," I began, opening my briefcase. "But theater is for the masses. For you, I brought documents." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply took out the copies I'd made of Arthur's file and slid one in front of each board member. "You'll find 2 things in those folders," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the award sitting on my desk back at Elysian. "First, the original, undoctored projections for the Vance 2.0 initiative I proposed 5 years ago, the one you were told would bankrupt the company. As you can see, your own commissioned analyst projected it would have nearly doubled your market cap by now." A rustle of paper, I saw Sterling's eyes widen. "And second," I continued, my gaze landing on Serafina, who was frozen in her chair, "you'll find a file detailing a 5-year history of corporate sabotage, smear campaigns, and supplier interference against my company, Elysian, all orchestrated from the CEO's office of this very company." More rustling, a few low mutters. "But that's just business, isn't it?" I said with a thin, humorless smile. "What you should really pay attention to is the final section, a series of emails, and a particularly creative piece of fiction in the form of a forged medical document." I watched as, one by one, they reached the end of the file. I saw comprehension dawn on their faces, followed by disgust. They weren't just looking at evidence of bad business. They were looking at the anatomy of a deep, personal, and pathological betrayal. As if on cue, a screen on the wall flickered to life. My father's face appeared, gaunt and tired, via a video link I had arranged. "Ilara, what is this? What's going on?" "I think you need to see this, Dad," I said, my voice softening for the first time. I had an aide in his study with him, placing an identical folder in his hands. I gave him a moment. I watched his face on the screen as he read the emails from his other daughter. I saw his confusion turn to disbelief and then to a horrified, soul-crushing understanding. He looked up from the forged psychiatrist's letter, his eyes finding mine on the screen. The shame and regret in his gaze were profound. He didn't have to say a word. He finally knew. Serafina finally broke. "She's lying! It's all fabricated!" she shrieked, standing up so fast her chair screeched backward. "She's trying to steal my company." "Your company?" I asked, my voice dropping back to an icy calm. I stood up to face her across the mahogany expanse. You were never good enough to build something like this. You could only ever steal it. You sabotaged my proposal. You poisoned our father's mind against me. You tried to have me declared mentally unstable. You didn't win this company, Serafina. You cheated. I turned back to the stunned board. The hostile takeover was a bluff. I have no interest in auctioning off my family's history piece by piece. My offer is this: a full merger of Vance Heritage and Elysian. We will form a new entity, Vance Elysian. I will assume the role of CEO. I will salvage the legacy my great-grandfather built, the one she, I gestured to my sister, has nearly driven into the ground. I let the offer hang in the air. It was their only lifeline. Salvation and justice, all in one neat package. Sterling was the first to speak. He looked at Serafina with utter contempt, then at me with a newfound respect. I vote in favor of the merger and in favor of Mademoiselle Ilara Vance's appointment as CEO. Aye, another said. Aye. It was unanimous. Serafina crumpled back into her chair as if her strings had been cut, stripped of everything in the space of 10 minutes. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. I hate you, she whispered. I leaned forward slightly. I know, I said. And the difference between you and me, I don't care. The sign on the building now reads Vance Elysian in clean, elegant letters of brushed steel. A perfect fusion of the old and the new. The transition was a battle in itself. Merging two starkly different company cultures is like trying to mix oil and water. But I had Ben, my two-person army, and the unwavering momentum of a victor. I walked through the old Vance Heritage Workshop, now a marvel of organized chaos. In one corner, a master craftsman, a man in his 70s with hands like worn leather, carefully stitches a briefcase. 20 feet away, a young engineer in a hoodie tests the responsiveness of a new biometric lock. There's a buzz here now, an energy it hasn't had in decades. An energy I brought back. My father and I had a conversation. One. It was stilted and painful, held in his study, the room where he'd made the decision that changed our lives. I was a fool, Ilara, he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. She played on all my fears. I'm so sorry. I know, I said. It was the only answer I could give. Forgiveness wasn't a switch you could flip. The wound was too deep, the scar too permanent. But it was a start. A fragile, fractured piece. He's retired for good now, living quietly. We speak on holidays. It's enough. I never spoke to Serafina again. I heard she moved overseas, to Switzerland, or somewhere equally neutral and boring. She got a generous payout from her shares. I wasn't a monster, just thorough, but she's a ghost now. Stripped of the name, the power, the status that was her entire identity. I sometimes wonder if she's found a new life, or if she just sits in a beautiful house, consumed by a rage that has nowhere to go. Honestly, I try not to wonder too often. My office is the corner one. My father's, then hers, now mine. It overlooks the entire city, a sprawling map of lights and possibilities. I've redecorated. Gone is the dark, oppressive mahogany. It's all glass and light and clean lines now. It's Elysian. It's me. On the corner of my vast, uncluttered desk sits a single photograph. It's the only thing I kept from the old office. It's of me and Serafina, aged about 8 and 10. We're in a field of wildflowers behind our childhood home, our arms around each other, grinning at the camera with identical gaps in our teeth. We look happy. We were happy. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening after the last employee has gone home, I pick it up. I look at that smiling girl with the scraped knees and the trusting eyes, and I feel a pang of something that might be sorrow. For her, for the sister I had and the one I lost long before I ever realized she was gone. I touch the glass for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the little girl who was betrayed. Then I put the frame down, turn back to the window, and watch the endless river of headlights flowing through the city below. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. They're wrong. It's a feast. One you cook yourself over years with anger as your fuel and success as your main ingredient. And when you finally sit down at the head of the table you built, you realize it's not about the revenge at all. It was never about destroying her. It was about building me, reborn on my own terms in the heart of the empire I took back. The view from up here is spectacular.